In this game from Jose Raul Capablanca, he shows us how positional superiority leads to tactical dominance. This game was played in a match in 1913 in Berlin against Richard Teichmann, a player most famously known for saying that chess is 99% tactics. And I believe he has been given the GM title posthumously. I can't confirm that, but in the chess-based database, it says that he does have the title. Let's jump right in. Teichmann has the white pieces. Capablanca has black. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop to B5. Teichmann plays the Spanish or Ruy Lopez opening. Capablanca asks the question of the bishop. Are you going to take the knight? He plays bishop to A4, knight to F6, castles, and B5. These are standard Ruy Lopez ideas. Black gains space on the queen side. The bishop goes back to B3. Now bishop to E7 and rook to E1. White defends the E4 pawn. D6 from black. Capablanca is not going to play anything fancy here, just a mainline Ruy Lopez, and he prepares kingside castling. C3 from white. The idea, of course, is that if this bishop gets chased, it can tuck back into C2. It's a very strong minor piece. White wants to keep it. The C3 pawn also keeps black's knight out of D4 and prepares the D4 push himself. So a good multi-purpose move there. Capablanca castles. And here, a bit of a surprise from white. He plays D3. Not quite as aggressive as D4. Basically, he's trying to avoid a clash in the center just yet, and that can take time to sort of maneuver his pieces into an attacking formation. So Capablanca will have to press in the center if he wants to create complications here. Knight to A5, going after that bishop at B3, which now does tuck into C2, and C5. Another idea behind knight to A5 here is for black to gain space on the queen side with C5. Now knight b to d2, the classic Ruy Lopez maneuver from Teichmann. The knight is going to f1, where it can pop up at e3 or g3. And now knight to c6. Capablanca re-centralizes that knight. a4 from Teichmann. So, yes, black does have space with this b5 pawn, but also it can become a target for attack, and this a4 move is trying to do that. Black has to do something because white is threatening to take on b5, as there is a pin on the A file. Black would lose a pawn. So what Capablanca does is just play bishop to E6. That connects the queen and the rook, so now he doesn't have to worry about the pin on the A file. And the bishop at E6 can support a D5 push. I mean, if white's not going to play D4, maybe black will be the one to break in the center. White continues with his plan, going to F1 with his knight. And now B4 from Capablanca. Yes, that weakens C4, but the knight that was on D2 is now on F1, so it no longer has immediate access to the square. So he's not too worried about that, and he's gaining space, and he'd like to create a weakness on C3. Bishop to G5 from Teichmann. Rook to B8, just backing up that pawn, maybe taking, maybe you can play the rook to B2, or at least control the file when it opens up. So now Teichmann plays in the center. He plays the D4 push, and Capablanca has to do something, as white is threatening D5, forking the knight and bishop. So he goes ahead and takes on D4 with the C-pawn. White does the same. And now this next move from Capablanca is where we begin to see a little bit of separation between the two players. It's a very irritating move. He plays the move bishop to G4, moves that bishop a second time, but he's pinning the knight to the queen and directly attacking this D4 pawn. At the moment, he could just take it if white doesn't do something about it. And the best move for white looks to be pawn takes pawn. And after knight takes e5, he can play the knight 1 back to d2. And black may have a slight advantage here, but not much at all. Teichmann plays bishop to e3. He defends the pawn with the bishop. And now pawn takes pawn. And here Capablanca begins to get an edge. White does have to take with that dark squared bishop. And this is a very good piece for white. He'd rather not exchange it off for the knight at c6, but Capablanca does not take it immediately. He plays knight to d7. And what he has determined here, obviously correctly because of the continuation of the game, is that this b2 pawn is a serious, serious weakness for the white pieces. And he wants to dominate this dark square diagonal, maybe put the bishop at f6 and put direct pressure on b2, because if he can win that pawn, he's just going to be winning the game. So this becomes sort of the main target for Capablanca. And so he's maneuvering his pieces to put pressure on b2. White should probably just save the bishop with bishop e3, but he continues with knight to e3. That hits the bishop at g4, but Capablanca just goes ahead and takes the knight at f3, and white cannot recapture with the queen because he would lose the dark squared bishop. The knight takes d4. So he has to take with the pawn. And now this f4 and e5 square are further weaknesses in black's position, further dark squared weaknesses. And Capablanca plays b3, fixing the weakness on b2. Now, white cannot take that pawn because Capablanca would then take the bishop at d4. And after queen takes, he could take the bishop at b3 and he would win a piece. So that forces the bishop to move back. And now the b2 pawn is fixed on b2. He can't even move it. So now knight takes d4. Now he takes that bishop. Queen takes d4 and bishop to f6. Skewering the queen, aiming at the pawn. The d6 pawn is not something white wants to take because then bishop takes b2. Not only does he win the pawn, but the rook is trapped. It has no squares either. So he has to try and defend b2. So he plays the queen back to d2, but now knight to e5. And this is what I was talking about, where we see the positional superiority leading to a tactical superiority. Every move comes with a threat. Now Capablanca is threatening knight takes f3 check, which would fork the king, the queen, and the rook. So queen to e2 to cover that f3 square, but now knight to g6. Aiming at this pawn at f4. If a knight were to land there, he might be able to ignore the b2 pawn and just go for mate. White really cannot allow that. So knight to d5 hits this bishop, but more importantly covers this f4 square. So bishop to e5 from Capablanca, trying to keep these weaknesses fixed on f4 and e5. But here Teichmann makes a good practical decision. He gives up a pawn with f4. He can't get it. He can't allow those squares to be completely blockaded. He would have no chance. If Capablanca were to take with the bishop, which kind of makes sense, you'd love to have a knight on f4 against a light squared bishop, but in this case, white could play queen to g4, hitting that bishop, and in the bishop moves, he could play rook to e2 to defend b2, and he'd be in a position to play f4, and black is still better, but white's fighting here. So because of that, Capablanca goes ahead and takes with the knight. He doesn't care about an opposite colored bishop scenario because the b2 pawn is his ultimate target. He knows if he gets that, he's fine. So knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and again, this pawn at a6 is taboo because of queen to h4, attacking the h2 pawn. So Teichmann plays bishop to d3, so he can take it with the bishop, but a5, so it can't be captured now. Now bishop to c4, putting some pressure on b3. If this rook were ever to move, he might be able to take it. But now queen to h4, attacking the h2 pawn, and f3, so the queen can defend laterally. That is why, if it took on a6, that's why queen to h4 would have been decisive. But now with the queen still on e2, it can defend the pawn laterally after f3. But watch how quickly Capablanca gets the rest of his forces into the attack. Rook f to c8 with a serious threat. He's threatening to take that bishop. If he takes it, this leads to a quick mate. And the threat of mate on f2, and if he brought the queen back, queen to h1 would be mate. Those are the kinds of threats that black has here. So Teichmann has to do something. He moves the bishop back to d3, but now rook to c5. This nice rook lift, the rook enters into the attack with threats of rook to g5 check, or rook to h5, adding another attacker to the h2 pawn. Rook to f1, so Teichmann, he wants to use his rook, move it to f2, so now he can have two heavy pieces defending on the second rank. Capablanca just doubles on the c-file. Queen to f2, the offer of the exchange of queens, which of course Capablanca does not accept. He goes ahead and moves to h6 now, threatening bishop to e3, pinning the queen to the king. So Rook f to e1. He has to stop that threat. But now rook to g5 check. And this forces a bad choice for white. If he goes to f1, then after queen to h3 check, king to e2, rook to g2 pins the queen, and that would be the game. So it really has to go to h1. But now, after rook to h5, the threats against the h2 pawn are too great. This king on h1, it makes the capture here much more potent. So rook to e2 is played. The Capablanca plays rook takes h2, and in this position, white resign. Now, it may look like Teichmann can get, a bishop and a rook for a queen. Not great, but should he still be resigning? Well, actually, yes, because after queen takes h2, bishop takes h2, rook takes h2, Capablanca can play rook to c1 check, forcing these rooks off of the board. And after king to g2, only now, in the variation after the resignation, does he finally take the pawn at b2. And in this position, he has a queen and 3 pawns for a rook and bishop. So that's a monumental material advantage. Not to mention this b3 pawn is a beast. There would be no way white can do anything about it. So Teichmann resigned after rook takes h2 check. A beautiful game from Capablanca where we see positional play naturally flow into tactics. Hope you've enjoyed this game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.